The small town of Assisi in Umbria, Italy, is most well known being the birthplace of Saint Francis, but most fail to recognize the vital role the town and its people played in saving the lives of hundreds of Jews during World War II. In a sunlit Assisi museum, a small antique printing press stands silent. Its metal plates once churned out prayer cards for pilgrims, but in 1943, under Nazi occupation, this humble machine became a lifeline for hundreds of people. In those dark days of World War II, the medieval hill town of Assisi, birthplace of Saint Francis, transformed into an unlikely sanctuary. Through an underground effort later known as the Assisi Network, priests and townsfolk risked everything to save Jews from Nazi persecution. They forged identity papers in secret, sheltered families in monasteries and convents, and orchestrated escapes under the noses of occupiers. It's a true story of ordinary people, united by extraordinary courage and faith. In 1943, Italy was a nation at a crossroads. Mussolini's fascist regime had allied with Nazi Germany, enforcing anti-Jewish racial laws that stripped Italian Jews of jobs, rights, and safety. But by summer 1943, Mussolini was deposed, and Italy secretly agreed to armistice with the Allies. When this became public, on September 8, 1943, chaos erupted. German forces swiftly occupied central and northern Italy, refusing to relinquish their grip. Suddenly, tens of thousands of Italian Jews, previously spared deportation, were in mortal danger as Nazi roundup and deportation to death camps began. The threat was stark and immediate. In Rome, over 1,000 Jews were seized in a single raid in October 1943 and sent to Auschwitz. Across the German-occupied zone, Jewish families fled their hometowns, desperately seeking any refuge from the looming genocide. Assisi, a tranquil Umbrian town of stone churches and winding lanes, had never had a Jewish community of its own. Yet as war engulfed Italy, this city of Saint Francis became a beacon for the displaced. By autumn 1943, streams of refugees, many from big cities like Milan, Padua, and even as far as Austria and France, flowed into Assisi. Among them were hundreds of Jews, hoping that in this town, dedicated to a saint of peace, they might be safe. They blended in with crowds of other Italian evacuees, escaping Allied bombings and frontline fighting. Assisi's ancient walls, which had sheltered pilgrims for centuries, now harbored families on the run from the Nazis' race for extermination. The salvation of Assisi's Jews did not happen by chance. Behind the scenes, a quiet conspiracy of goodness was taking shape. At its heart was the town's bishop, Monsignor Giuseppe Placido Nicolini, a scholarly Benedictine who had been Bishop of Assisi since 1928. As reports of Nazi atrocities grew, Bishop Nicolini felt compelled to act. Sometime in September 1943, shortly after the German occupation began, he summoned a trusted young priest, Father Aldo Brunacci, to a confidential meeting. Father Aldo, just 30 years old and a canon of Assisi's cathedral, listened in amazement as the bishop produced a letter from the Vatican itself. "We have to organize ourselves to help those who are being persecuted, especially the Jews," Bishop Nicolini told him. "This is the desire of the Holy Father, Pope Pius XII. Everything must be done with the greatest secrecy and prudence. Not even the other priests must know anything about this." Those words set the moral imperative and the cloak and dagger tone of what would follow. The Pope's own representative in the Vatican, Monsignor Giovanni Battista Montini, the future Pope Paul VI, had quietly instructed churches to shelter Jews wherever possible. Now, in Assisi, Bishop Nicolini resolved to do exactly that. He appointed Father Aldo Brunacci to lead the clandestine rescue operation, effectively making the young priest the coordinator of what they called the Committee for Assistance, to refugees. Outwardly, this committee had already been helping war refugees of all kinds, with food, shelter, and clothing. But secretly, it expanded into a full-fledged underground network dedicated to saving Jews from deportation and death. Father Aldo was soon joined by other co-conspirators. One was Father Rufino Nicacci, a humble Franciscan friar who was guardian of the monastery of San Damiano just outside Assisi's walls. Another was Father Michele Todda, a priest at the massive Basilica of St. Francis, the Sacro Convento. Both men agreed to hide Jewish refugees within the monasteries under their care. Key laypeople stepped up too, notably Luigi Brizi, a local Catholic who owned a tiny souvenir and printing shop on Assisi's main street, and his son Trento. The Brizis possessed a small hand-operated printing press, normally used for prayer cards and postcards. Now it would be repurposed for a far more dangerous task. Together, this handful of priests and citizens formed the backbone of the Assisi Network. They swore to maintain absolute secrecy. Everything must be done with the greatest prudence, the bishop had cautioned. Very few outside the circle were to know the truth. If even one German informant or fascist collaborator caught wind, it could mean not just the failure of the mission, but the execution of everyone involved and the slaughter of those they were trying to save. Years later, an American president describing Assisi's rescue noted that a slip of the tongue by a single informant could have condemned the entire village to the camps. Yet they did not yield. The people of Assisi were literally betting their lives on their ability to keep a sacred secret. One of the first challenges was practical and urgent: how to allow Jewish refugees to live safely under Nazi noses. Simply hiding people indefinitely in attics or caves wasn't enough. The town was crawling with refugees, and suspicious authorities could arrive at any moment, demanding documents. The solution the Assisi Network devised was ingenious. Give the Jews new identities. With false papers, the fugitives could move about more freely, blend in with other Italians, and even claim government rations for food. If stopped by Nazi patrols or fascist police, they could present legitimate-looking documents and avoid arrest, as long as the documents could withstand scrutiny. That's where Luigi Brizi's little printing press became a weapon of life. Late at night, behind the shuttered windows of his souvenir shop, Luigi and his son Trento quietly inked blank identity card forms on the press. By day, the shop sold holy cards. By night, it produced salvation. Using supplies pilfered or bought on the black market, the Brizis printed dozens upon dozens of fake identification papers for the Jews in hiding. Each document was carefully crafted to look authentic, complete with official-looking stamps and seals. In fact, young Trento Brizi even bicycled to the nearby town of Foligno to find a friend skilled in metal engraving who could duplicate the embossed seals of various Italian municipalities. The forged papers were printed in one location and stamped in another, to minimize the risk of the whole operation being caught in one raid. Father Aldo Brunacci himself often served as the courier, discreetly carrying batches of blank identity cards from the print shop to the place where the seals were applied, using his bicycle and the cover of darkness. Each refugee was given an Italian alias, often a new name and background that placed them far from Nazi reach. Many identities claimed that the person was from southern Italian towns that were already under Allied liberation. For example, a Jewish woman from Milan might be given papers saying she was Maria Esposito from Bari, a city safely in Allied hands by late 1943. This way, if a German or fascist official tried to verify the identity, they would be stymied, chasing a person from a region beyond their control. As Father Aldo later explained, we located their place of residency in a city south of Rome, So we knew that if a suspicious German or Italian fascist soldier tried to check the documents, they would hit a dead end. These false papers were lifesavers. With identification cards and even forged ration coupons in hand, Jewish refugees in Assisi could venture out to buy food and supplies. They could rent rooms or apartments in town under assumed names, rather than remain huddled in a single hideout. Incredibly, Bishop Nicolini even arranged for the children to enroll in local schools, pretending to be Catholic or secular war evacuees. Thanks to the Brizi's secret printing press and the network's careful planning, dozens of endangered people received not just new documents, but new lives. False papers alone could not guarantee safety. Many refugees still needed secure places to hide, especially if they were already known or if raids occurred. Fortunately, Assisi abounded in ancient monasteries, convents, and holy sanctuaries. Bishop Nicolini realized that these sacred enclaves could become havens. He enlisted no fewer than 26 monasteries and convents in and around Assisi to shelter Jews. Some of these were even cloistered orders, normally sealed off from the outside world. But in this emergency, doors opened. The bishop and Father Brunacci deliberately avoided well-known pilgrimage sites. Those might be searched first, and instead used more secluded cloisters and abbeys. Among the safest refuges were the convents of enclosed nuns, communities like the Poor Clares, Clarice, the German Capuchin nuns, the Stigmatine sisters, and the Benedictine nuns of San Apollinare. By church law, such cloisters were strictly off-limits to outsiders, especially male visitors, a rule which, in this case, provided an extra layer of protection against prying Nazi eyes. Inside these hallowed walls, Jewish women and children found shelter, and even some men were hidden in disguise. Father Rufino Nicacci, the Franciscan friar at San Damiano, became particularly adept at camouflage. He provided many Jewish fugitives with Franciscan robes and habits, teaching them how to walk with the humble bearing of a friar, and even how to mumble Latin prayers so they could pass as monks if German troops came by. Likewise, a number of Jewish women were given simple nuns' habits, or housed as if they were new postulants, blending in among the sisters. By disguising Jews as friars and nuns, the Assisi Network turned the symbolism of the cloth into literal protection. With shaved faces and sandaled feet, a Jewish professor or tailor could momentarily become Brother Giuseppe, living quietly among real monks. The local clergy also opened the doors of churches, rectories, and even the bishop's own residence. Bishop Nicolini's palace, an imposing stone building that had once witnessed St. Francis renounce his riches centuries ago, now became a secret dormitory for those fleeing Nazi terror. At one point, the bishop's quarters were so full of displaced people that barely a spare bed remained. Yet Nicolini still did not turn anyone away. One refugee, Professor Emilio Viterbi, had been a renowned chemistry professor at the University of Padua before being expelled under the 1938 racial laws. Viterbi, his wife, and 2 daughters found haven in Assisi. He later recalled how he went to Bishop Nicolini in desperation, asking if the bishop could shelter his family in case of an extreme emergency. The bishop, who was already housing countless others, smiled kindly and replied, "There is no room left except my bedroom and my office. However, I can sleep in my office. The bedroom is yours." With that simple act, the bishop gave up his own bed for a persecuted Jewish family. "This is what this distinguished prelate of Assisi was like," Viterbi wrote gratefully. It was not only documents and hiding places that the Assisi rescuers provided, but also genuine compassion and dignity. Within the improvised sanctuaries, every effort was made to preserve a sense of normalcy and honor religious traditions. The network understood that these refugees were not only running for their lives, but were cut off from their community and faith. In one moving example, Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish year, arrived in September 1943, while many Jews were sheltering in Assisi. Rather than let it pass unobserved, Bishop Nicolini quietly authorized a gathering. In a secluded convent, the Jewish refugees were able to hold Yom Kippur prayers, and the Catholic nuns even prepared the meal to break the fast after the Day of Atonement. Later that autumn, Father Aldo Brunacci went a step further in caring for the spirit of the children. He helped arrange a secret Hebrew school, where Jewish youngsters gathered in tiny numbers to learn the basics of their heritage and language, ensuring their faith would not be lost. These activities were perilous. An unwelcome sound of Hebrew song or an extra gathering of people could arouse suspicion. But the rescuers believed that survival was not enough. The refugees should also live and maintain hope, even in hiding. Every precaution was taken to avoid detection. No centralized list of the hidden Jews was kept. It was too dangerous to write anything down when spies and informers lurked about. Bishop Nicolini did quietly keep the real identity documents of many refugees hidden in a niche behind his desk, so that after the war their true identities could be restored. But this hiding spot was known only to him and Father Aldo. Day to day, the network relied on verbal messages, trusted couriers like the Brizi boy on his bicycle, and the sanctuary of the confessional for passing information. To the outside world, the Jews of Assisi simply vanished into the fabric of the town. They became distant cousins or old friends of the convents, patients in church-run hospitals, or faces in the crowd of displaced Italians. And remarkably, the townspeople of Assisi kept the secret. Years later, one survivor attested, "Those of us who found refuge in Assisi will never forget the efforts made to save us. In Assisi, not one of us came to any harm. Not a single Jewish refugee was betrayed by the citizens of Assisi. A quietly stunning fact amid a war of betrayal and terror." The Assisi Network operated under constant risk. German troops and Italian fascist police still patrolled the area. Occasionally they would conduct raids and searches for fugitive Jews or resistance fighters. Thanks to careful warning systems, the network often got advance notice of danger. Assisi's mayor, Arnaldo Fortini, though a fascist party member by position, was privately sympathetic to the rescue efforts. A scholar and author who loved the legacy of St. Francis, Fortini worked behind the scenes to help. He used his authority to argue for Assisi to be treated as a non-military, open city. He also leaked warnings of impending Nazi raids to Father Aldo and the bishop. This allowed the network to temporarily move or double hide the most endangered individuals when a door-to-door search was expected. Fortini even offered to safeguard valuables for Jewish families. Graziella Viterbi, Emilio Viterbi's daughter, remembered that the mayor hid her family's precious religious objects in his own garden, burying things like candlesticks and Torah scrolls to prevent their confiscation. Such clandestine kindness from a city official exemplified how a broad swath of Assisi's citizens quietly collaborated to foil the Nazis' plans. Still, close calls were inevitable. In May 1944, as war raged ever closer, German authorities grew suspicious about Assisi. Father Aldo Brunacci and several of his collaborators were abruptly arrested by German security forces. We can imagine the fear that gripped the network, their indispensable leader in chains, possibly facing torture or execution if his activities were revealed. Bishop Nicolini sprang into action, leveraging every church connection he could. It's believed that the Vatican, through Monsignor Montini's contacts, intervened swiftly with regional German commanders. After a tense period of uncertainty, Father Aldo was released from custody. The price was exile. The authorities, suspecting him of something subversive, banished him from Assisi. Heartbroken but undeterred, Brunacci had to watch from afar as his flock continued the mission. He later said of that time, "There are times in everyone's life in which it is easy to confuse prudence with a calm life. There are times when heroism is required." In 1944, Assisi required heroism, and Father Aldo noted that Monsignor Nicolini took the path of heroism. Indeed, even with Father Aldo absent for a short while, Bishop Nicolini and the others doubled down to hide any evidence of the operation and protect the people under their care. By God's grace and good fortune, the Germans did not uncover the full extent of the Assisi Network. Brunacci's arrest was the closest they came, and it could have been catastrophic. Yet, astonishingly, not a single Jew in Assisi was captured. The network held firm. Alongside the well-known figures of the clergy, there were unsung heroes aiding the cause. For example, the renowned Italian cyclist Gino Bartali, a national sports idol, used his training rides as cover to carry messages and documents between Assisi and other cities. Bartali, who had won the Tour de France, was a devout Catholic and had been recruited by resistance elements. Under the guise of long-distance exercise, he ferried forged papers hidden in his bicycle frame from a secret printing operation in Florence to Assisi, and carried news back to the Vatican and networks in the north. His efforts tied into Bishop Nicolini's wider web of rescue that extended even to cities like Florence and Genoa. In those dangerous times, even a bicycle courier could be a savior. One unlikely ally was the enemy commander himself. Colonel Valentin Müller, a German army doctor, arrived in Assisi in late 1943 to take charge of a medical unit. A Bavarian Catholic, Müller was more physician than warrior, and he had a profound respect for Assisi's holy heritage. Sensing the town's vulnerability, Müller worked with Mayor Fortini and Bishop Nicolini on a bold plan. Declare Assisi a hospital city, a neutral zone for war wounded. Under the Geneva Convention, this status would forbid bombing or combat in the area. Müller persuaded his superiors to back the idea. Soon, Red Cross flags hung on buildings, and Assisi's hotels were cleared of German troops to make way for hospitals. Fortini ensured no Italian military units would be stationed there, and Bishop Nicolini even asked the Vatican to lobby Allied forces not to target the town known for St. Francis. The gambit worked. Assisi was largely spared from violent conflict and aerial bombardment, even as battles raged only miles away. This relative calm was a godsend for the Assisi network. With fewer German soldiers around and no bombings, it was far easier to hide people. Colonel Müller surely suspected that his peaceful town was teeming with hidden fugitives, yet he turned a blind eye and focused on his medical mission. On multiple occasions, when stray German units tried to requisition buildings in Assisi for military use, Müller intervened to stop them. He even converted a strategic villa into a military hospital overnight after Bishop Nicolini alerted him that German troops had begun occupying it, thus removing the soldiers and maintaining the city's non-combat status. In effect, this German officer used his authority to shield Assisi from the worst of the war. His motives might have been duty to the wounded, love of Franciscan law, or quiet resistance to Nazi excesses, perhaps all three. Locals later credited God, St. Francis, and Colonel Müller as the unlikely trinity that kept Assisi safe. By June 1944, the Axis grip on central Italy was collapsing. Allied forces advanced steadily, and the German army prepared to retreat north. These final days were among the most perilous for Assisi's secret refugees. Desperate SS squads, notorious for scorched earth savagery, roamed the countryside around Assisi, looting and burning as they withdrew. Had they entered the town, they might have swept through every convent and cellar in a last-minute frenzy of violence. Recognizing the danger, Colonel Müller took a final, courageous stand. He ordered his remaining staff to form a barricade at Assisi's gates, literally blocking armed SS units from coming in. No combat troops were allowed to breach the sanctuary city in those chaotic hours. While furious battles and artillery shelling thundered on the hills nearby, Assisi's interior became a refuge, not just for Jews, but for frightened citizens and the wounded. On the night of June 15, 1944, as explosions echoed in the distance, townspeople and monks huddled in the lower basilica of St. Francis, turning it into a massive shelter and offering prayers for protection. The very tomb of St. Francis became a gathering place for Christians and Jews alike, united in silent hope that they would survive till morning. Their prayers were answered. By dawn on June 16, 1944, the last German forces, led by Colonel Müller, quietly evacuated Assisi, slipping away just before Allied troops arrived. The British 8th Army and other Allied units rolled into Assisi the next day, finding the town miraculously unscathed by war's destruction. There was no battle in Assisi's streets. The art and shrines were intact, and most importantly, every one of the hidden Jews was still alive. In total, an estimated 300 Jews had been sheltered and saved by the Assisi Network. Not one was deported or killed. In the annals of the Holocaust, such a complete success is astonishing. A small Italian town had defied the Nazi death machine and managed to protect all those who came within its walls seeking refuge. In the euphoric days after liberation, the Jewish survivors of Assisi embraced their protectors. Lifelong friendships were forged in those convent corridors and church cellars. Families retrieved precious items that had been hidden. Dusty heirlooms from Bishop Nicolini's cellar caches and Mayor Fortini's garden. Many refugees eventually left Assisi to reunite with relatives or rebuild their lives elsewhere. Professor Viterbi and his family returned to their home. Some, like the Finzi family from Belgium, went back to their country after the war. The Finzis had the unique distinction of having a baby born while in hiding with the Poor Clare nuns. Years later, a clueless bureaucrat mailed a notice to the Assisi convent, calling that child for Italian military service, not realizing he'd left long ago. As they departed, the rescued carried with them the memory of a town that had lived the values of its most beloved saint. As one survivor put it, in the mass extermination of 6 million European Jews, in Assisi, not one of us came to any harm. The courageous souls behind the Assisi Network never sought recognition. In their minds, they had simply done what faith and conscience demanded. Bishop Nicolini often downplayed his role, attributing the success to divine providence and the unity of his community. Father Nicacci returned to quiet parish life, and Father Brunacci resumed his ministry in Assisi after a brief displacement, eventually becoming the beloved pastor of Santa Maria Maggiore Church. Luigi Brizi went back to running his little shop, but the world would not forget their deeds. In the decades after World War II, as the truth of the Holocaust rescue efforts gradually came to light, these modest heroes received honors befitting their humanity. The State of Israel, through its Holocaust Remembrance Authority, Yad Vashem, awards the title Righteous Among the Nations to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews. In December 1977, Yad Vashem recognized Monsignor Giuseppe Placido Nicolini posthumously via his successor, and Father Aldo Brunacci with this Medal of Honor. A few years earlier, in 1974, Father Rufino Nicacci had also been named a righteous Gentile for his crucial part in organizing the effort. Later on, in 1997, Luigi Brizi and his son Trento were similarly honored for forging those life-saving papers. In all, at least 5 of Assisi's rescuers have been so recognized, although truly the entire town earned that distinction in spirit. When some of these heroes traveled to Jerusalem to plant a tree in the Garden of the Righteous, they did so humbly. Don Aldo Brunacci, upon receiving his medal, simply said he had just done my duty as a Christian. He liked to remind people of a basic truth. God is our Father, and we are all brothers and sisters. In Assisi's hour of testing, that belief was put into practice. Even the German Colonel Müller did not go unappreciated. Though he was an enemy officer, the people of Assisi remembered him as a savior. After the war, the town named a street after Colonel Valentin Müller. He paid a visit in 1950, walking the peaceful lanes he had helped preserve. Townsfolk greeted him with warmth and gratitude. On his grave in Bavaria, it's said, he had carved an image of the Basilica of St. Francis and the Latin words, in serviendo consumor. In serving, I am consumed. It's a fitting epitaph for a man who quietly subverted his orders to serve life over death. Today, the story of the Assisi Network lives on as a shining example of moral courage. In Assisi, a museum of memory in the beautiful Palazzo Valimani now displays artifacts of that time, including Luigi Brizi's very own printing press and samples of the false identity cards it produced. Photographs line the walls. Bishop Nicolini, stern yet gentle. Father Brunacci, bespectacled and smiling. Friar Nicacci in his brown robes. Mayor Fortini, Colonel Müller, and group portraits of some of the 300 Jewish men, women and children whose lives they save. Visitors often leave in tears, moved by the realization of what ordinary people can do when guided by conscience. As one walks through Assisi's quiet streets today, it's hard to imagine the tension and bravery that once unfolded here. But the spirit of those days is embedded in the stones. The legacy of Assisi's rescuers is not only the lives they preserved, but the lesson they left for future generations. In a time of unspeakable cruelty, they chose compassion. When obedience to an evil regime was the norm, they chose defiance in the name of faith and humanity. They did so without promise of reward, under constant threat, motivated by a simple conviction that all humans are brothers and sisters. Don Aldo Brunacci perhaps said it best when he reflected on the disparate band of clergymen, citizens, and even adversaries who came together in Assisi. In a period of passion and opposing views, he wrote, a few citizens had overcome, even at great risk to their own persons, the divisions between ideologies, and saw in each person a brother or a sister whom they must save. In the end, that vision of shared humanity prevailed over the hatred that surrounded them. The Assisi Network story has been told in books and even a feature film, The Assisi Underground, spreading its fame far beyond Italy. But perhaps the most poignant epilogue occurred in October 2013. On a visit to Assisi, Pope Francis, a pope who took his name from the town's beloved saint, met an 88-year-old woman named Graziella Viterbi, the last known survivor saved by Bishop Nicolini's network. In the very hall of the bishop's residence, where she and others had once hidden, Graziella took the Pope's hands and said, "Thank you for what the Church did for us." With humility, Pope Francis replied, "I thank you." In that simple exchange was an acknowledgement that the light of compassion shown by Assisi's wartime heroes still burns bright, inspiring new generations to do what is right, no matter the cost. In the hill town of Assisi, the bells of ancient churches continue to toll each evening. They ring for vespers, for peace, and perhaps in silent tribute to those who, in the darkest of times, answered the call to love their neighbor as themselves. The Assisi Network reminds us that even in an era of brutality, goodness found a way. In Assisi, courage wore a cassock, a habit, and sometimes a printer's apron, and hundreds of lives were saved by its grace.